Welcome back into the Bible study tonight. Let's open our Bibles to the book of Psalm chapter 5. Psalm chapter 5. We continue to deal with the title of this particular psalm, How to Deal with Lies and Slander. If you are a student of the news and you just watch the news, it's all about lies and slander. And each person justifies his own lie, his own slander about the other person because somebody else did it. And so what you have is the corrupt accusing the corrupt of being corrupt. You have liars accusing liars of being liars. You have slanderers accusing slanderers of being slanderous. Okay? And it's just no end to it. If you notice, one person says one thing, and then he or she justifies it because of somebody else. So nobody is held accountable for their own behavior simply because somebody else did it some other time. So it's one of those somebody done me wrong songs, And I am convinced that the United States of America, it's all about singing country music, okay? It's all about singing country music, My dog died, my cat died, my wife left me, my children hate me, my house burnt down, my horse is mad at me, the cows turned on me, and the goats laugh at me. It's just no end to it, okay? And so, and you get caught up in this modern society because of the media's, our medium of communication is just so readily available to us on television and on radio. And you see it now on the internet and all the social, what do you call those things, social media. And it's always about, somebody else did this 10 years ago, so we should be allowed to do it now. And there's no end to it. And ultimately, it's always focusing on what somebody else did wrong to justify your present wrong. And that's exactly how this works. Well, I want to draw your attention to that issue tonight as we look at Psalms chapter 5, because the psalmist David found himself exactly in this same situation. So it's only 12 verses, and let's go back to Psalm chapter 5, starting in verse 1. Give ear to my words, O Lord, and consider my groaning. Heed the sound of my cry, for help my King and my God. For to you I pray. In the morning, O Lord, you will hear my voice. In the morning I will order my prayer to you with an eagerly watch. For you are not a God who takes pleasure in wickedness, nor evil dwells with you. The boastful shall not stand before your eyes. You hate all who do iniquity. You destroy those who speak falsehood. The Lord abhors the man of bloodshed and deceit. But as for me, by your abundant loving kindness, I will enter your house. At your holy temple, I will bow in reverence for you. O Lord, lead me in your righteousness because of my foes. Make your way straight before me. There is nothing reliable in what they say. Their inward part is destruction itself. Their throat is an open grave. They flatter with their tongue. Hold them guilty, O God. By their own devices let them fall. In the multitude of their transgressions thrust them out. For they are rebellious against you. But let all who take refuge in you be glad. Let them ever sing for joy. And may you shelter them. Those who love your name may exalt you. For it is you who blesses the righteous man, O Lord. You surrender him with a favor as a shield. Tonight what I want to do is to go back and look at this and focus in my remarks in verse 7. Verse 7. Now we've done the introduction a number of times, so I'm going to skip that and just go straight to point number 3, and we're going to look at point 7, at verse 7, which is make a renewed commitment to be faithful in prayer and worship. As you watch the news unfold, and you watch all the social media unfold, and you watch all the news pundits, all the experts, and after a while, it just gets sickening listening to these guys because all they do is accuse each other of lying while they're accusing each other of lying. And it's just absolutely no end to it. And it's always, notice one thing about this, it's always a focus on what the other guy is doing. The reason why I can be mean-spirited to you is because somebody else was mean-spirited to somebody else, and now I'm going to even the score. That's basically the kind of mentality that you hear. And I don't care what news you're watching. I don't care if it's ABC, CBS, NBC, or MSNBC, or CNN, or Fox, or any of the other letters that are out there, okay? Everybody's doing the same thing, and the mentality is that everybody is doing it. Well, not everybody is doing it. But the focus is always to retaliate. It's always to take a revenge, and it's always to outdo your opponent. And that's the mentality. That is the clear mentality that you hear. And we're so inundated by it that we're like the frog who thinks he's in a sauna, taking a bath, and has no realize he's getting cooked alive. And after a while, what happens is that it affects us. It does affect us. Because we fall into the trap that everybody is doing it. Everybody is being malicious and vile with their words. So we feel justified that we can do the same. And then you go to the Christian media and you begin to hear similar patterns develop. And so you pretty much come away with, well, it's okay. David does something very different in this psalm, and I think it's so subtle that we miss it. David doesn't turn toward his enemy, even though he prays about him and prays for him, but he turns to God about himself. When you're being attacked by somebody, the most difficult thing to do is not to look at your attacker. You're trying to figure out how you're going to outsmart him, outmaneuver him. You're going to try to figure out your strategy, how to attack or counterattack. Because that's the natural human tendency. What David does is something different. David really turns to God about himself. That really is the hardest thing to do when you find yourself under a personal, vicious, vile attack, is to turn to God and God, look at me. That's really difficult to do. Because while you're trying to do that, everybody else is still piling on. Okay? And so that's what I want to draw your attention to tonight. If anything else in this particular psalm, look at verse 7. But as for me, by your abundant loving kindness, I will enter your house. At your holy temple, I will bow in reverence for you. So point 3 is make a renewed commitment to be faithful in prayer and worship. That's literally what David does while he's under a vicious, vile attack. He turns to God. David sharply contrasted himself with the evildoers whom he had spoken. Now go back to look at verse 4, 5, and 6. For you are not a God who takes pleasure in wickedness, nor evil dwells with you. The boastful shall not stand before your eyes. You hate all who do iniquity. You destroy those who speak falsehood. The Lord abhors the man of bloodshed and deceit. Now, if you know that to be true, and obviously David knew that to be true, and then you turn around and you conduct yourself in the exact same manner as in 4, 5, and 6, then tell me, what is the difference between you and those who have attacked you? None. But we always find the most unique way to justify our feelings, our thoughts, and our actions. Isn't that true? It's the old traditional cowboy, right? Country song, you done me wrong song, so you're going to just play it back to them. But think about it very carefully. David makes this open acknowledgement in prayer to God and then makes a decision. Look at this in verse 7. But as for me, your abundant loving kindness, I will enter your house. At your holy temple, I will bow in reverence for you. Now, he was able to do that because earlier he had made a commitment to God. I think that's probably the thing that we forget. What was the commitment that we made to God? Now, I'm not saying this is easy. I'm not saying that this is fast to do, that this is, second nature to you. Because when you get attacked, you immediately go on the defensive. That's our natural human tendency. But David reminds us that before this, he had already made a commitment. And he's talking to God, but he's talking to himself. Sometimes, we need to talk to ourselves. We're so used to having conversations with everybody around us, right? Sometimes you just got to stand in the mirror and talk to you. You need to talk to yourself and say, Lord, you know what? What I would love to do to this person, but I can't do that. I need to talk to me, inhale, exhale, calm down. I'm about to get out of step with you, God. If I follow through on my feelings, and let me tell you, I've said this before, feelings are real. They're very real. Don't ever let anybody tell you your feelings are not real. They're real. The problem is that they're not reliable because they're dangerous. One moment you're mad, right, and you're angry, and next moment you're happy. One moment you're just, Lord, why is all this happening to me? And then somebody comes and drops $100,000 in your pocket, and you're like, oh. you see how fast you see how fast your feelings change? They're real, but they're not reliable because they change so fast. Now look at verse 3 in this psalm. David had already declared the fact that he was faithful in worshiping the Lord daily. That was key for him. He says in verse 3, in the morning, O Lord, you will hear my voice. In the morning, I will order my prayer to you and eagerly watch. I don't understand. Perhaps it's all the stupid pills that I drink. One of the hallmarks of our culture, and for those who are tuning in from around the world, I'm talking about the American culture. In the American culture, one of the greatest hallmarks that we have and we're proud of is that we're spectators. Isn't that right? We're spectators to every conceivable sport that's out there, right? I mean, there's volleyball and there's thousands of people go. There's basketball, thousands of people go. There's football, there's thousands of, and then there's the American sport, baseball. I don't care for all you football players and all you soccer players and all that. You know what? I don't care what you say to me, but in this country, you'll never beat baseball. Okay? Now, you may uphold all your sports, okay? But in this country, it's still baseball. It is the sport of the gods here, okay? It's the only sport that plays more games than any other. By the way, baseball plays more games than football, basketball, okay, and soccer combined. There's 162 games in baseball. And they fill up the stadium 90% of the time. Now, preseason baseball, there's 35 games. So this is the biggest thing. Now, why do I share that with you? Because we're experts on being spectators, are we not? We watch everything on television. We watch everything in the movies. We are so used to being spectators that we sit on the sidelines and we watch everything take place. And somehow that doesn't translate to our relationship with God. You will pay $500, $1,000, $3,000 for some stupid artist singing in some concert, to be a spectator and go crazy, jumping up and down, walk out of there completely deaf. Okay? You haven't understood what they said anyway. You go to some championship basketball game where they're charging you $25,000 for a ticket, and people pay it. We're great at being spectators except for God. Have you noticed that? We'll watch everything. We'll watch two cockroaches race down the track. But we won't watch God do what he does. Somehow we have no patience for God. We're into speed. You know, every year Pastor Phil goes to this fast car racetrack thing. I don't know what you call it. What is it called? The Long Beach Grand Prix. You know, and he went with Lewis, and I think, you know, Lewis met his match in terms of speed there. You know, and it's like, and people pay big money for this stuff. We are incredible spectators. And where I find the hypocrisy of it all is that we don't have patience to watch God. Watch God do what he does. We have to take the righteousness of man, which is self-righteousness, and we're going to use our self-righteousness to get even. Look at this in verse 3. In the morning, O Lord, you will hear my voice. In the morning, I will order my prayer to you and eagerly watch. Really? Isn't it true that I want to rather get even with you right now instead of watching God do? You know what? God is merciful and He's gracious. And I can guarantee you that He'll take care of your enemy. Okay? He won't always destroy him like the way you want to destroy him, right? You want to see his complete destruction. Remember Jonah? Remember Jonah? Jonah was upset. Okay? He was so upset that God would even consider saving the people in Nineveh. Like, no, God, you can't do that. In fact, Jonah told God, God, I know you. I know what you're going to save them. You're going to be gracious and merciful to them, and I can't have that. Okay? I just can't. I can't allow you to do that, God. And Jonah just could not do that, and God had to just have him swallowed up by some big fish, right? Right? Spit him out, looked like salt. Right? Burned his skin, he bleached him. Okay? Took care of him. And in the end, Jonah had to go and preach, right? And what happened? The people repented and came to God. Remember that? Well, are we not little Jonahs? No, wait a minute, God. I'm going to take care of him myself. I'll take care of him. No, God. Because if you get involved, you're gonna forgive him and you're gonna restore him. And it's like, I don't feel good about that. And David, at the end of verse 5, at the end of verse 3, he says, and eagerly watch. How many of us can eagerly just watch God do something? The idea of praying for the benefit and the blessing of your enemy is not something that sits well with many of us. And yet, we're spectators to everything except when it comes to God. Step aside, God. Sit down. Have a cup of coffee. I'll take care of this. That's and we don't realize how wrong we are. Now, David, remember, King David is running for his life. His son Absalom had declared that he was going to kill him, take over his throne. Now, Absalom had already been mean enough to take care of his brothers and sisters, by the way, if you don't know the story. Just go back to the Old Testament. This was no loving, son. And yet, David could say, I'm going to watch. It's really hard. It's difficult to sit back when you've been attacked and just smile and say, okay, Lord. And then God says, pray for him. Now, God says P-R-A-Y, pray, and you want to P-R-E-Y, pray on him, right? That's what you want to do. Look at this. So now, he presents himself anew before his king and his God. He makes a renewed commitment to be faithful in prayer and worship. Now, how many times have you been attacked viciously by somebody and you say, okay, God, I'm just going to pray and worship you? No, you're thinking about, come and meet me in the alley back here. So there's two things I want to talk about tonight. A, and approach God through his great mercy. To approach God through his great mercy. And B, be reverent. That's kind of hard to do when you've been attacked, right? Be reverent, right? Now look at this. And this is what David teaches us. Look at this. So let's look at this. Approach God through his great mercy. Now in Psalm chapter 5, verse 7, and I have it in the NASB version, New American Standard Version of the Bible, but I also have it in the King James Version. Look at this. But as for me, by your abundant loving kindness, I will enter your house at your holy temple, and I will bow in reverence for you. In the King James Version, he says, but as for me, I will come into the house in multitude of thy mercy. Have you noticed that we don't use that word much, mercy? Have you noticed that when you speak to the typical Christian, he's always talking about grace, right? Grace this and grace that. Grace this and grace that. Now, remember when we were growing up, it was Gracie and Alan, right? It's all grace this and grace that. But we don't talk about mercy. We don't want to talk about it. Mercy is one of those concepts that it's only applicable to me and to nobody else. You have no problems with grace being poured out on all kinds of people. You do have a problem when it comes to mercy. Look at this. He said in verse 7, by your abundant loving kindness or by the multitude of thy mercy. You see that in both versions of the Bible? It is only through God's mercy that we have access to him. The word mercy is the word in the Hebrew chesed. And chesed is God's unfailing, steadfast love, his unmerited favor, and his devotion to us. You know, grace is receiving what you do not deserve, right? That's grace. But mercy is not receiving what you do deserve. Okay? And the truth is that, you know, we have these conversations. We know, well, it's not fair. And I always tell people, you're right. It's never been fair. It never is going to be fair. It will never be fair. We have this strange American concept called equality. And we've actually bought into that nonsense. We have. You know, everything is, I don't know where you got the idea of equality. It's, by the way, you know, you realize that equality is a social construct, right? It's a social cultural construct. It was created, it never, because equality doesn't exist in the Bible. Look, if you take everybody in here tonight, neither one of us are equal to each other. We're all uniquely different. We are uniquely different. Men and women here tonight, we're all uniquely different. But we've taken the idea of equality to mean that we're all supposed to be the same. That's an act of impossibility. God made you uniquely different. He made you uniquely different. He made you uniquely different. Which is the reason why we have no problem with grace. But mercy? Mercy is uniquely, individually, specifically applied to each and every one of us. Mercy is not receiving what we really deserve. And if what we really deserve is God's wrath, and his mercy, his unfailing, steadfast love is that he pours it upon us when we don't deserve it. Now, who wants things to be fair? I don't. I am happy just with his grace and his mercy. I don't understand what fairness is. Because even in the political realm, when we talk about equal opportunity, I want you to think about this. That concept doesn't even exist in the Bible. And we bought into it. You know, when we were in college, in the early 1970s, when my wife and I, we went to college, and we were sold the bill of goods that it was equal opportunity. We never thought about it. It never entered our minds. You know, we thought it was the political correct thing to do and blah, 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 blah. But think about it. Nowhere in Scripture does it discuss equal opportunity. In fact, it's antithetical to God. God says this. He says, do not be deceived, right? God cannot be mocked. You cannot make God a fool. Whatever a man sows, that he will reap. You see that? That's in Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. So everything depends on what you sow. It's not equal opportunity. It's what you sow. Now, I can prove to you why equal opportunity doesn't work. It never will work. Okay? If you remember the entire parable of the talents, remember that? And you remember the talents in Matthew chapter 25? And don't look at it, but don't turn to it, but you can just write it down. In Matthew chapter 25, starting in verse 14, all the way to verse 30. Now, you go back and read that parable. And this is what happens. God is likened to a master, right? A slave master in this case, right? And he has 3 slaves. And what the Bible teaches in Matthew chapter 25 is that they all had ability. They didn't have disability, they had ability. Okay? And God rewarded each one according to his ability. Okay? And he gave one 5 talents, right? And one turned 5 into 5 talents. And he was told he was a good and faithful servant. The other one was given 2 talents, and he produced 2 talents, right? Because it was given to according to his ability. And then the third one was given 1 talent according to his ability, and it was expected he would produce 1 talent. He didn't do that. He was afraid, and he buried it in the backyard. Remember that, in the ground? Right? And then God took from him the 1 and gave it to the 10. Not only did he take the 1, go back and read it, especially verse 29 and 30. And here's the horrifying fact. Here's what you discover. You discover that God in verse 29 and 30 not only took the 1 from him in verse 28, but in verse 29 and 30, he took whatever the guy with the 1 had, all that he had from him, and gave it to the rich guy. So the poor get poor and the rich get rich. Now, if you want to talk about opportunity or equal opportunity, well, all 3 were given the equal opportunity. The problem with that concept is that equal opportunity does not translate to equal ability. Which is the reason why you need to appeal to God's mercy and to appeal to God's grace. But ultimately, you and I are responsible for doing whatever God has put into our hands. Listen, God will bless some people more than he'll bless others. And the one who's less blessed gets mad at the guy who's more blessed. Well, you have no right to do that. You don't. In fact, that's the height of human arrogance. Because the one who's been given more and blessed more tends to do more with what he's been given. Now, you get mad at him because he did more? You get mad at him because he was a better steward than you, a better manager of you. He took care of things better than you. So you're mad at him for that? Now, I realize that that's a sidebar, but you need to understand why I'm pushing the idea of mercy and grace. And in our country, in our cultural context, we push this idea of equal opportunity. The problem is that it does not translate into equal ability. Because what you're trying to do is to tell God you have to bless each one equally. Well, that's a dumb idea. When he just said, hey, God cannot be mocked, do not be deceived. Whatever man sows, he's going to reap, right? So what does David do? He appeals to mercy. Look at this. Look at your notes. This trait stirs God to offer his covenant to us and to unfailingly keep his covenant with us. Now, we may fail the Lord, but he never fails us. The problem is that we want to compare what he's given to us with each other, right? And what we want to do? Mercy is one of his attributes, one of the qualities that reveals his unparalleled character. God is not stingy with his mercy. His house is filled with his steadfast love. It is more than sufficient to cover our sin. I don't want equal opportunity to go to hell. I want mercy to avoid hell. David made a promise to the Lord when he returned to Jerusalem. He would again come into God's house, the tabernacle, the place where his holy presence dwelt. If the setting of this psalm is Absalom's rebellion, this is a great statement of faith in God's deliverance. David had fled from Jerusalem into the wilderness. Now you go back to 2 Samuel in the Old Testament, chapter 15, turn there, and look at verse 14 or 23, because I want you to see that what David is saying in Psalm chapter 5, he actually did it. This was built into his character by now. Look at this in 2 Samuel chapter 15, starting in verse 14. David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, "Arise and let us flee, for otherwise none of us will escape from Absalom," right? He's going, "Go in haste, or he will overtake us quickly and bring down calamity on us and strike the city with the edge of the sword." Because you see, King David understood this. We know that King David was not a coward. We know that. He was not. I mean, here's the guy who killed lions and bears, Goliath, right? He faced everybody. So obviously he wasn't a coward. But David understood something, that if he stood on the battle line against his son Absalom, and remember, David's army had turned on him. So he was outmanned, let's put it this way. If you're only 10,000 soldiers and you got 1 million soldiers that come against you, you're going to stand there and fight? There's not too many bright guys who are going to do that. The only way you do that in military action is a suicide mission, where you've asked a division, you've asked a platoon, you've asked a tag group, okay, stay behind, you're not coming home, but you need to buy us time. You need to buy us time, and you're going to buy the time with your life. You understand that? That's why they call for volunteers for that. However, what you need to understand with David understood this truth, that if he stood and fought Absalom, Absalom was not only going to kill him and his soldiers. David could accept that, but he was going to raise the city. He was going to burn it down and kill everybody at the edge of the sword. That's what this is talking about. Now, David had to make a decision. Call me a coward and run and save the city, or stand and fight and die and let everybody else die. Do you understand the difference? So David had to now abandon himself into the hands of God. Now, that's really hard when you're a warrior, because when you're a warrior, we're going to fight. But not every battle has to be fought. Now look at the next verse, verse 15. Then the king's servant said to the king, behold, your servants are ready to do whatever my lord the king chooses. So the king went out and all his household with him, but the king left 10,000 concubines to keep the house. Right? Now that had to throw off Absalom. He gets there and he goes, where are the men? Even Absalom was not ready to kill all these women. The king went out and all the people with him, and they stopped at the last house. Now all of his servants passed on beside him. All the Kerethites and all the Pelethites and all the Gigatites, 600 men who had come with him from Gath, passed on before the king. Now that's all he had left, was 600 men. A little tough. Then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, why will you also go with us and return and remain with king? For you are a foreigner, also an exile. Return to your own place. And then he says, you came only yesterday. Shall I today make you wander with us while I go where I will? Return and take back your brothers. Mercy and truth be with you. You don't have to die with us. But Ittai answered the king and said, as the Lord lives and as my lord the king lives, surely wherever my lord and my king may be, whether for death or for life, there also your servant will be. Therefore David said to Ittai, go and pass over. So Ittai and the Gittite passed over with all his men and all the little ones who were with them. You do realize that these soldiers traveled with their family. Kind of hard to go to battle and you got your wife and your kids. You know, if you don't know this, but armies didn't do that. We do know two major armies in world history did that. We know the Israelites did that. And we know that the Vikings did that. They would go to war with their families because they were not going to leave their families behind to be ambushed. So the women learned how to fight. Look at this. Verse 23. While all the country was weeping with a loud voice, all the people passed over. The king also passed over the brook Kidron, and the people passed over toward thy way of the wilderness. You know where the brook Kidron was, right? That's literally right in Jerusalem. I mean, he wasn't gone. He hadn't gone far. You know the wilderness? Remember Gethsemane, where Jesus was found? That's the beginning of the wilderness. Which should tell you that Absalom's army was right on his heels. Now, before the battle against Absalom's forces ever began, he committed himself to worship the Lord after the victory had been won. Now, there's two significant facts you need to look at. First, David's pledge to be faithful in worship was an acknowledgement that the victory over such impossible odds could come only through the Lord. It would be the Lord's faithfulness, his covenant promises, that would make God's dear servant victorious. See, David understood, I can't do this. I'm going to have to abandon myself into the hands of God and trust God. How many of us are willing to trust God? All of your fiber, all of your heritage and cultural upbringing says go to war right now. I remember years ago, when I was in Save, I'd have take your head off. I'd go to war with you. I don't care how big. In fact, the bigger you were, I just used to smile at you. Because I size you up, I go, I know exactly how I'm going to take you down. I had no problems with that. I was that stupid. It just didn't. And I went through, and I fought anybody. It didn't matter to me. I got saved, and I remember years ago going through the Old Testament. And I couldn't figure out why David made the decision not to fight. I mean, he was a warrior. Like, what is wrong with you? And I kept studying it out. Now today, and I've said this numerous times, you can talk about my wife any which way you want, how ugly you want, it doesn't move me at all. Talk about my children, doesn't move me at all. Why? Because I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to provoke me. I understand that, okay? But I also know the truth. And here's the key. I know the truth about my wife. I know the truth about my children. You can't tell me something I don't already know. Okay, number one. And number two, I've settled that issue between me and God already. So I don't have to be provoked like a child. When we were growing up, remember those the cute little phrases we used to have? They don't make any sense, but they were cute, right? Sticks and stones may break my bones, but your words will never harm me. That's a lie. You say something to somebody, and they take your head off, right? Right? And we kind of perpetuated that lie, right? But David understood something. He understood that he had to abandon himself into the hands of God. And I remember finally coming to the conclusion about what David had done in the Old Testament. I went, oh, it took more strength to do nothing. And then realized it took a lot of weakness to do something. And not wait on God. That was a hard lesson to learn. Secondly, although David refers to his faithfulness in this prayer, remember verse 3? In the morning, O Lord, you will hear my voice. In the morning, I will order my prayer to you and eagerly watch. He did acknowledge that it would be God's mercy that delivered him, not his own righteousness. David didn't stand there and say, wow, God, look at me. I've been a good little boy. Even my wife can't look at me. Not even my son can look at me. but think about it. But David didn't say that. Look at how righteous I am. Look how faithful I've been to you. No, he didn't do that. He appealed to God's mercy. See, when I stand on my own righteousness, it's self-righteousness. He's got Absalom on his heels, and he would stop and pray. Most of us do not stop and pray. We fortify our positions. That's what we do. Look at this. Although David refers to his faithfulness in his prayer, because he did in verse 3, he acknowledged that it would be God's mercy that delivered him, not his own righteousness. And then secondly, it's difficult to be reverent. Come on. Somebody just slapped you in the face. It's kind of hard to be reverent, isn't it? I mean, everything inside of you, you can feel the blood just rushing up. You can feel the anger coming out of you, right? Look what he says in verse 7. Psalm 5:7. But as for me, by your abundant loving kindness, I will enter your house. At your holy temple, I will bow in reverence for you. David made an unusual commitment to the Lord at this point, at this juncture of everything. While he was in the wilderness, when he worshiped, he would bow down and pray in the direction of the Lord's holy temple or dwelling place. By the way, in case you want to know where the Muslims got this idea from, this is where it comes from. Christianity was, Judaism was around many years before Islam. In reverence or fear of the Lord, he would bow toward Jerusalem. By the way, if you ask Muslims, and if they're honest, they'll tell you it's called the book. It's talking about the Christian Jewish Bible. Fear is the reverential awe and recognition of God, who is an attitude that results in submissive obedience to him, and his word. David recommitted himself to walk humbly before the Lord during the time when he was forced out of Zion. It's kind of hard when you're running for your life to do that. Here's the thought. Confronting overwhelming odds, David offered himself as a living sacrifice to the Lord. He prayed and trusted God for victory, but at the same time, he was fully aware that God can choose otherwise. That's why he says in Romans chapter 12 in the New Testament, it says this, in verse 1 and 2. He says, therefore I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God. Now we're going back, right? You see that? By the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and a holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be what? Conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove that what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Which tells me that you have the ability and you have the capacity to make that decision. Now, you may choose not to, but you clearly have the ability and the capacity to do so, which is the reason why God punishes you. You know, when someone has offended you and you're the offended one, what does the Bible teach if you're the offended one? You are supposed to initiate the reconciliation. Well, you sit there, well, Rosie insulted me, and I'm not going to, I'm not talking to her until she apologizes to me. You're going to stub your nose at her and roll your eyes back, and blah, 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 blah. Wait a minute. It's not her responsibility to come to you. It's my responsibility to go to her. The offended one, the Bible teaches very clearly, Matthew chapter 18 lays it out in detail for us. Okay? It says that the offended person is the one who's responsible for going to the offended one. If you don't do that, you become the one who's guilty. To know to do right and not to do right, to you it is what? Right? Isn't that Phil's favorite book, the book of James, right? Right? And that's what it says. Now, I know that sounds counterintuitive. It's like you're going, wait a minute, but she's the one who insulted me. I don't have to go to her. No, that's not what the Bible teaches. Sometimes somebody may offend you and don't even realize they offended you. They're at home sleeping. They got a hottie toddy, right? They got a hot chocolate. They're just comfortable watching the news, they're happy-go-lucky. They got no idea. It's your responsibility. The wounded, offended one is responsible for getting aid to get healed. David understood that fact. Look at this. God often grants victory to his faithful people, but, here's the big but sometimes he chooses that they suffer for his glory. Well, suffering is not right. That's not the gospel. That's not God's will that you should suffer. I hear Christians say all the kinds of crazy things. It's not God's will for you to suffer. Well, they obviously are not reading in the Bible. They may be reading some other version of the Bible, but it can't be the one that we're reading. Okay? It's great faith that believes God for the victory. But it is greater faith that it is devoted enough to trust and worship God in the midst of suffering and trial. In the midst of suffering and trial, you still have to worship God. You ever see people get, in trials and suffering and tribulations, and they quit going to church? They quit praying. They cut themselves off from the body of Christ. You have no idea what I'm going through. No, and I don't care. You have a responsibility to be before God. You want to get out of this muck and mire that you're in? Get in front of God. But what you want to do is you want to punish God's people, punish his work, punish the kingdom, and all you've done is to extend your problem. Suffering is part of the package. You don't forget that you and I live in this fallen world. And there's nothing right about this world. Zero, nothing. I was teaching this afternoon about what I was teaching in the other country that I was in last week. And I was explaining to the brethren, because they couldn't figure it out. They were telling me, you have no idea, Pastor, how we suffer in this country. And it just went on and on and on and on. And I just was quiet. And finally, one of the pastors asked me, "You're not saying anything." I said, "I'm trying to contain myself." You think that poverty and being poor is a virtue by which you should be rewarded. And they went, "What?" I said, "Yes, you do." I said, you know what an economy is? Think about the word economy. It's a noun, right? Economize is a verb, right? What does economize mean? It's something that you do, right? Right? You try to manage what little you have, right? Now, an economy is the study of scarce, limited resources with alternative uses. In this fallen world that you and I live in, everything has a limit in this world. God doesn't have a limit, but the things of the earth has a limit. God can move resources any which way he wants in the most limitless fashion possible. But the average Christian is just as ignorant as the guy out there. He has no clue what he's doing with the finances that God has put in his hands. He lives exactly the same way of the world, and he wants to complain that God is not providing. No, God has provided. God's not your problem. You're the problem. But we won't admit that. So I was explaining that we were in this taxi cab, right? And they were explaining to me, well, the taxi cab is just too expensive. It was $25 everywhere I went. I don't know why you look so shocked. It took 25 to 40 minutes to get to where I was going. Now, you have to admit, $25 is cheap. Because in Los Angeles, if you took a cab ride for 25, 35, 45 minutes, it's not $25, right? From my house to the airport is $25 a taxi. I've taken it. Literally, it's $25 to go from the house, and you see how close we live to the airport? To the airport, it's $25. I understand that. And you see how close we live, right? And so I told myself, and so they were trying to convince me how difficult it was. And I go, well, if in Los Angeles, if I was in a cab for 45 minutes, trust me, it would not be $25. But I understand everything's relative, right? And they said, well, why? And gas is $18 a gallon. And they go, it's not right. I said, well, can I ask you guys, do you guys produce oil in this country? And they said, no, we have to import it. I said, well, there you go. And they said, and every time we come up with something new, gas goes up. We don't understand it. And I said, well, they were putting in a new road. They were putting a new asphalt road, right? And it's supposed to go for something like 1,000 miles, some ridiculous, length, right? And they said, the gas keeps going up. And I said, well, let me ask you something. What is asphalt made out of? I don't know. Oil. Where does gas come from? Oil. Stay with me. I know you can do this with me. Economy is the study of scarce, limited resources with alternative uses. Now, you've just taken oil and you turn it into gas. That's one use. You've taken oil and you make asphalt. That's another use, right? Which means what? That the price keeps going up, right? Because you have more uses for the same product. I'm amazed. People go to college and they learn nothing. They learn absolutely nothing. They pay a lot of money to stay dumb. And then we're going down the road, right? And literally, on both sides of the road, all you see is millions of plastic bottles everywhere. The garbage is just, I said, oh, it's like Los Angeles. Right? And you just watch this. And I said, do you see that? Yeah, that's plastic. I said, you want to know why your oil prices are so high? They said, plastic? I go, yeah. Let me ask you something. Where does plastic come from? Oil. How do you think they make plastic? It comes from oil. You know that black goop that goes into the tank of your cars? Okay, and you get that white transparent plastic? That's what it comes from. Now just look at all the millions of plastic thrown everywhere. Scarce resources, limited resources with alternative uses. And the more products that you create out of this one thing, the more limited it becomes and the more expensive it becomes, and you're complaining. And everybody had a cell phone. And I said, what's it made out of? Plastic. They had all their slippers. I said, what's that made out of? And they went, oil? Yeah. And there's millions of them all over the place. We kind of act as though things are not fair. It's not fair. It's not supposed to be fair. It's not supposed to be fair. But in the midst of all that, I said, will you find time to worship God? Oh, we're so concerned about this and that and this and that and this and that and this and that and this and that. And my daughter's sick, my son is sick, my big toe, my little toe, It's just endless, the excuses that we have. We just can't put up with this. We can't put up with that because, we're suffering. We have a little trial, my hangnail over here. And it's just endless and endless and endless and endless. And here David is running for his life. And he says, stop, everybody. We got to worship God. Doesn't matter what our economic condition is. It doesn't matter what our physical condition is. It doesn't matter what your emotional condition is. Those are all manifestations of a bigger problem. The bigger problem is not having a relationship with God. That's your problem. That's the problem. And David understood that he could demonstrate some kind of faith and commitment before God in the midst of the trials and tribulations. Look, this is the kind of faith that we must have as well. When God, for his purposes, chooses not to deliver us from some trial, we must still trust in him. I don't know why I'm stuck in this situation at the moment. But I better trust him and worship him. When he gives and when he takes away, we must still bless his name. Job found that out. Now, how many of you have had 7,000 camels, 5,000 sheep, 3,000 goats, another 3,000 donkeys, 10 children, houses, and everything taken away from you? Anybody in here? And then you had a wife who cursed at you and told you, why don't you just curse God and drop dead? You know what she just told you? By the way, that's the old Hebrew way of saying go to hell. In case you didn't know it. If you curse God, you were going to go to hell. That was it. Okay? How many of you had that experience? Job did. Now, what did Job do wrong? Nothing. In fact, Job was such a righteous man. He was so right with God that God bragged about Job to the Satan. He said, okay, Satan, have you considered my servant Job? Now, what did Job do wrong? Nothing. He did everything right. Job prayed every day. In fact, the Bible teaches in the book of Job, chapter 1, it teaches this. It says this, that for every day of the week, because his sons, he had 7 sons. The Bible says in the book of Job, chapter 1, it says that he had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And it said that for every day of the week, the sons had a party. They had a party on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And they would have a party in each one of their own houses. And they would bring their sisters to party with them, right? Things were different back then. And you remember when Job was written? People go, wow, that's not too long. No. The problem is that Job is in the middle of the Bible, right before Psalms. So we think that chronologically Job happened here. No, Job is right after Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Okay? That's where Job sits, okay, in the chronological scheme of things. And God says to Satan, look at my servant Job. I give you permission to do whatever you want with him. Like Job had no vote in this. Like, wait a minute, God. We could have at least talked about this. God, what'd you do me wrong for? Haven't I loved you? Haven't I served you? Haven't I been right with you? Haven't I, blah, 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 blah. See, the problem is that would have been me, which would have been no different than Satan, right? Lucifer in Isaiah chapter 14, which, by the way, happens right before that. Before that incident with Job is Isaiah chapter 14, where Satan says, I will raise myself above his throne. I will. He says it 5 times. I will. He had a bad case of the memes, right? Me, right? Can you imagine Job saying, God, wait a minute. I've been this, I've been that, he'd have been found in the same place. And Job, what was his fault? What did he do wrong? He was right with God. And God tested his righteousness. He told Lucifer, you can do whatever you want. What you cannot do is kill him. And don't touch him personally. Don't kill him. So Job woke up with what? All his sons died, all his daughters died, all the houses burnt down. He lost everything he had, okay? And then he had a wife that just criticized him and cursed at him all day long while he sat with boils all over his body in a heap of ash. What did he do wrong? Nothing. And that's when you discover the sovereignty of God. God can do whatever he wants to whomever he wants for whatever reason he wants. He is the what? The creator. Remember the book of Jeremiah? Does the clay have the right to tell the potter what to do? No. We like to. A little bit over here, God. A little bit over here. People, they stand in the mirror and they go, God, I wish you'd have moved my nose over here. I wish you'd have done something with my ear over here. I wish you'd have done something with my forehead over here. I wish you would have done. God, I don't know why you didn't do that. It's an amazing thing. Why do you think they created the cosmetic industry? We complain to God, God, you should have done this. You should have made me taller. You should have made me shorter. You should have made me this. You should have made it. Man tells God all kinds of crazy things. And Job resigned to the fact when God said, oh, buddy, where were you, by the way, when I was hanging those balls in the sky, we call stars, planets, When I lit up the world, the universe, where were you? Did I have to consult with you? Remember that? The book of Isaiah, the book of Jeremiah? Suffering is part of the package in this world that you and I live in. That's a reality. By the way, 90% of the things that happens in this world are outside of your control. God, why did this happen to me? Because you live in a fallen world. You don't have to be wrong. You don't have to have not done anything wrong for things to happen. We live in this world. It's the way it is. Look at this. This is the kind of faith. And Job understood this, and he said in Job chapter 1, verse 21, Job chapter 1, verse 21, he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. We celebrate when God gives, right? And we get angry when God takes. God, you took my wife. God, you took my husband. God, you took my son. God, you took my daughter. Time out. They were on loan to you for a while. That was it. But they're mine, not yours. That doesn't mean that your loss is any less and that your pain is any less. That's not what that means at all. But the reality is that we don't have the right to question God. Somehow we get on our high horses and we believe that we can. And here we have Job. Job kind of straightened my head out. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. I understand that. We must trust Him, and we must trust Him in glory and the strength that He gives to endure the trials that confront us. But we don't make the end decision. Look at it. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Turn your Bibles. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 8 and 9 says this. He says, concerning this, I implored the Lord. Remember this? What did the Apostle Paul do? He got saved. He got righteous. He got right with God. Doesn't the Bible teach us that from the day you're born to the day you come to the cross to your salvation, all this has been forgiven? Right? And it's like you got a clean slate. You start, we have a do-over, right? We're walking with God, right? We're going to walk with God now. And from this point to the day we die, right? Right? Isn't that how we teach that? Right? But that's not true. Not true. We have consequences. The guy who gets sick and he's dying of cancer because he's been smoking his entire life. He finally quits. He gets right with God. He gets right with his body, right? And God saves him. He saves him righteously, right? But the cancer's still eating at him and he dies. The young lady, she comes home and she says, Mom, Dad, I'm pregnant. And Mom and Dad forgive her. She's still pregnant. We think that forgiveness means eliminating the consequences of our life. It doesn't mean that. The Apostle Paul found that out. In fact, God called the Apostle Paul and said, you will come and you will serve me, and you will suffer greatly. How'd you like to get called that way to the ministry? Right? Health, wealth, prosperity gospel teaches, come and wallow in the dollar bills, right? Wallow in the silver and the gold. Nobody tells you wallow in suffering, right? How many people would answer that call? The Apostle Paul got called. And by the way, when God calls you, you don't have any say-so in it. When God calls you, he said, it's not how you call your child, right? And your child looks at you. No, trust me, when God calls, you don't even do it. You just come. Now, you got 5,000 questions in your head, right? But you come, right? I never dreamed of being a pastor. Are you nuts? As vile and vicious and ugly that I was, me being in the church. Are you crazy? I used to hit people in the church. I used to beat up church people. And then God has a sense of humor, right? And he calls me, right? Yeah, God straightened me out. Look at this. So he tells the Apostle Paul, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 8 and 9, he says, concerning this, I implored the Lord 3 times that it might leave me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Whoa. God, can we kind of skip the weakness part? Let's just get to the power part, right? He says, most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. You see where David is in all this? He had to face the possibilities that he was going to be criticized for not standing, and he's known as a warrior. Johnny, go away, come back and play another day. Right? Rain, go away. Right? And David had to make that decision. Sometimes you just have to walk away. It doesn't matter what they call you. You just have to walk away. And he did that. God is always true to himself and to his dear children. If we love him, he will work all things together for our good. The problem is that we like the part that he will work all things for our good. The problem is, what you and I don't like? Is the things part. God, can we skip all the things and just get to the good part? Right? Can we just avoid all the things and just get to the good part, right? Well, look what he says in the book of Romans. In Romans chapter 8, verse 28. Now, we love this verse, right? And I was doing an audio series in my office that I've been recording. And I've been on Romans 8:28 for a while. And he says, and we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Now, I got to be honest with you. We all love the second half of this verse. It's the first part of the verse that we don't like. He causes all things to work together. Can we just get to the good part, right? That's what we want. Look at Matthew chapter 26, verse 39. Open your Bibles there. Matthew chapter 26, verse 39. He says this. He says, and he went a little beyond them and fell on his face and prayed. This is Jesus. And Jesus said, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not I will, but as you will. He had to go to the cross. But even Jesus said, not my will, your will. You know, humanly speaking, that's not easy. It's not. Humanly speaking, you know, like, I mean, think about it, right? You know, you're in the bed, you're ill, you're sick, you know, you just want to die there, and God is doing a work in you, and you sitting in the bed go, give it to this person. Yeah. Well, there's a blessing, right? There's a blessing, right? You know, you can't do that, right? Look at Matthew chapter 26, verse 42. This is Jesus again. He went away again a second time and prayed, saying, my Father, if this cannot pass away unless I drink it, your will be done. At some point, you have to come to resolution. At some kind, you have to come to a resignation where you resign yourself. This is going to happen. It's going to happen. I'm going to have to just. I found out that yesterday morning, my cousin in New York, she's 66 years old, right? We were raised together. And she passed away with cancer. And they gave her an alternative, but she would be a vegetable for the rest of her life. And she said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And the family was kind of just taken back by the fact that she said, I don't want to do this anymore. I prefer to die. And she died. Apparently, I found out 45 minutes later. She made the decision, I'm done. She said, I have to trust God. Jesus, the second time here in verse 42, he says, my Father, if this cannot pass away unless I drink it, your will be done. How many of us can actually pray, your will be done? Nobody wants to see their loved ones suffer any more than they have to. But there does come a point in time where you got to go. You got to let your sister go. You got to let your brother go. You got to let your son go. You got to let your daughter go. You got to let your parents go. There comes a time where you just have to be willing. You have to come to that point. Nobody can force you there. Nobody can push you there. You have to come to that point where you've made that decision. Well, you know what? You also have to come to that point in your personal life. There comes a point in time when I just can't do this anymore. You know, we live in a country, in a unique country, where we live a lie. You know, we consider aging a curse. We spend gazillions of dollars. You know, the cosmetic industry is some just outrageous amount of money. I mean, I forget the report was. They had this on CNN Business and on Fox Business, both of them. They both had it, and, you know, they never agree with each other, but they agreed on this, that the cosmetic and health industry alone, the amount of money that they make can literally run the governments of over 100 countries around the world. That's how much money is spent right here. We don't want to die. We want to live forever. Well, then if you want to live forever, you're going to have to die. We don't want to let go. We don't want to let go. That's the world, that's the culture that we live in. We're not willing to say, your will be done. We're not willing to do that. You know what? If we're honest, a lot of us have been blessed beyond measure. We've been blessed more than, you know what, than most people around us. But we don't want to let go. You know, you would think that people want to go kicking and screaming and scratching their way, you know, hanging on, okay, as God pulls them into heaven. No, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way at all. Look at this, Acts chapter 7. Turn your Bibles to Acts chapter 7, verse 59 and 60. Look at this. They went on stoning Stephen. What did Stephen do wrong? Nothing. He called on the Lord and he said this, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. How many of us are willing to say that? And you go, not yet, time out. I'm not ready. That poor brother that was with us in Zimbabwe. I prayed that prayer, and he said, "Oh, why are you doing that for?" I said, "They said they're going to kill me. I must want to get ready." He said, "Just like that?" I go, "Yeah." I told the guy, I said, "Hang on. I just want to make sure I get this straight. I want to make sure I understand it. I'm a stupid American. I don't always understand everything right away, so you got to kind of help me to understand this." "What?" I said, "Just help me. You're going to kill me, right?" He goes, "Yeah." "Okay. You're going to set me free, right?" "What? I don't have to wake up with arthritis anymore? My back is not going to hurt anymore? My knees don't hurt anymore? My feet don't hurt anymore?" I said, "You're going to set me free from all of this, right?" He said, yeah. And I wasn't trying to be cute. The thing was that the idea was that at that moment, present danger was that they were going to live. And I said, "Wow." And I said, "Glory to God." And what was his name? Chris. Chris was standing next to me. And the more I talked to the guys, and and they had their machetes out and they had their bats out and everything, and Chris kept stepping back. You ever tell somebody, "I got you," somebody tells you, "I got your back, brother, I'm with you," right? And you look back and they're way back there. And then I realized that I'm all alone, okay? And I understood that. But there comes a time in your life where you have to say, "Your will be done. Into thy hands I commit my spirit." Stephen was going to be stoned to death, and he understood that. Look at this. In verse 59, Acts chapter 7, they went on stoning Stephen as he called on the Lord, and he said, "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit." Then falling on his knees, he cried out with a loud voice, he said, "Lord, do not hold this against them." Having said this, he fell asleep. How many of you, in the face of an attack by an enemy, can you say, "Lord, forgive him"? You see, everything about Christianity is counterintuitive. Everything about Christianity is the opposite of what this world tells us. Complete opposite. No wonder we struggle with this idea of lies and slanders, because we're covered by it in the news media all day long. We're now covered by it in Christianity all day long. And we're getting sucked into this thing. David turned to God and toward himself in his relationship with God, and he put the other people in God's hands. Look at this. Hebrews chapter 11. In the book of Hebrews chapter 11, look at verse 36, 37, 38. Look at this. "And others experienced mockings and scourgings. Yes, also chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two." This is not some circus act. "They were tempted. They were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, and injured." You know what sheepskins and goatskin was? They used to cut literally live. And they would have all the blood and guts and the blood still on the skin. And they would put it on the people, and they would put them in the arena in front of the lions. And they had to be covered in sheepskin and goatskin, okay? And they're dripping in the blood, and the lions will smell that, and they eat you alive. That's what happened to many, 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 many believers in Rome. But it wasn't just in Rome, by the way. If you go back and you look at the historical records of Asia Minor would be modern-day Turkey. Okay? They did this in Macedonia. Macedonia is the northern part of Greece. Okay? We know that they did that in Italy, in Rome. Okay? We also know that this was done repeatedly throughout North Africa. It was common practice. Many believers died this way. Look what he says in verse 38. "Men of whom the world was not worthy, wandering in the deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground." Reminds us of Moses, right? And finally, I want you to look at Daniel chapter 3, verse 17 and 18. So I want to kind of put Psalms into perspective, which is why I got so excited about doing this series on Psalms. You know, it just like, it came alive for me. Look at this, Psalms chapter 3, verse 17 and 18. "If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king." If God chose not to deliver them, they were delivered. Finally, verse 18. But even if he does not, can you come to that point in your mind? Can you come to that state of resolution? To that state of conviction? He said, even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Do you get a flavor, a slight taste of the condiment that's on verse 7? Psalm chapter 5, verse 7, where he says, but as for me, by your abundant loving kindness, I will enter your house. At your holy temple, I will bow in reverence to you. It's at this point in life that you've got to come to. You're better off to make that decision now. Make it now. We're facing more and more an onslaught and opposition to Christianity. You know, the state of California legislature has proposed a new bill to outlaw all Christian material, all Christian books, including the Bible, in the state of California. That's right now going through the state legislature in California and Sacramento to make all Christian material, even the Bible, illegal in the state of California. That's the world you and I are living in. The bill that's following that is to make people like me illegal. Preachers. That doesn't move me. I've worked in the underground church in China. I know how this works. I just came from the underground church in Myanmar. I know how this works. You don't want anything from the government. You want no approvals from the government. I'm looking for God's approval. May I humble myself and turn to the Lord. Father, tonight